So we've got Game 4 coming up later on tonight between the Celtics and the Warriors. That game tips off, I believe, around midnight, or is it 9? Well, who cares? It's really late, so if you're going to bring a kid, don't curse in front of them, because apparently that only happens in Boston, according to members of the Warriors. But one of the other discussions was Draymond Green and his podcast, and what started picking up a little bit of momentum over the past 24 hours since we had talked about it was, is his podcast becoming a distraction? Is he not playing well in this series because he's focused on other things and not focusing more so on his podcast? So Draymond Green, of course, addressed the conversation about his podcast on his podcast, the Draymond Green podcast on the Volume Sports Network. Here's what he had to say.
I hear all the noise about the podcast. It's not going anywhere. You're going to get this podcast. If you don't want to listen, don't. But you're going to get this podcast, and if you want to talk about it, great. You know, I know, like, there's media people. I'm sorry that this podcast is probably doing better numbers than yours, or your attempt at doing a podcast, I ain't the one listening. I mean, so, you know, there's other people listening, so be mad at them. But y'all going to get this podcast. Win, lose, draw, hoisting the trophy, putting my ring on my finger. You name it. Y'all getting this podcast.
Yeah. This is my favorite part, is that if the Warriors lose this series, somehow people think it's because Draymond Green is focused on his podcast. Has nothing to do with it. His 2 or 8 or 9 points have nothing to do with whether or not and his podcast performance have nothing to do with whether or not the Warriors win this series. It's whether or not Klay Thompson can be consistent, whether or not Steph Curry can play through whatever his injury or ailment is right now, and whether or not the Boston Celtics turn the ball over, because when they turn the ball over, they lose games if you watch any of the postseason. This is a non-story, but for whatever reason, people are doing whatever they can to try and stir this up and make it a bigger deal than it is.
Can I make a comparison?
Yeah.
It's like people tend to think that these guys don't have, like, families or personal lives going on behind the scenes. Like,
right.
Is that a distraction? like if you got a couple kids, or you got a few kids, do you just shut them out for the entire NBA Finals? Like, I mean, I always find it kind of funny because athletes are some of the best at understanding how to manage their time. I mean, they live in a very regimented environment, and they understand what they need to do to prepare themselves to get ready, what they need to do to prepare themselves to perform at a super high level. Like, I mean, as a professional athlete, you're the 0.1% of the world of people who are able to do something and get paid for it, right? And so you're able to do all of that, yet we have people who then question, like, their ability to work in a podcast that's what, an hour, if that?
Yeah, I guess, maybe.
Like, he doesn't have, free time to do that. And oh, by the way, for the media or the people criticizing him for his podcast, you are taking stuff from his podcast and using it for your own well-being. It's feeding your job. It's in essence doing maybe some of the work that you're not doing. Like, if you want me to be fully transparent on my feelings on this, I think journalism's gotten lazy. And I think people ask terrible questions now. And I don't know what to draw that to. I don't know if we've lost a natural curiosity as human beings. But when I look at it and sit back and listen to press conferences, I'm thinking, okay, you asked that question, what's the follow-up? Or did you just listen to what he just said? Why'd you ask that? Or did you hear what she just said? Why don't you follow up with a different question or take it this direction then? And really what's happened now is so many athletes have podcasts, and we end up deriving more from them on podcasts because those journalists aren't asking those questions. Yet the players are talking about the real subjects. They're talking about the real things. And so, look, if you have a problem with him working that into his very regimented schedule, and now, by the way, he's had the podcast for how long? Like, it's not like this has impacted him, but now it's impacting him because it's the NBA Finals. I mean, guys have all kinds of other stuff going on in their personal lives. And yet we're going to point to this as being a reason why, he scored, what, 2 points, no points, whatever it was last game? I mean, I personally don't think there's any correlation. It's not a distraction. I think it's something that people want to pick on because he didn't play well last game. To me, it had nothing to do with that.
I mean, so you're telling me
the only Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, you're telling me in between all of these days off, in between NBA Finals games, he's not in the gym putting up jump shots every single second of every single day?
Well, or even to your point, he doesn't have enough time in his free time with all these days off to fit in a podcast.
It's just ridiculous.
I think if anything, the coverage of the podcast and the coverage of Draymond could be considered a distraction if there was a possibility for it to be a distraction. But they're used to Draymond being Draymond. I mean, Draymond didn't start becoming Draymond Green in these finals. It's not like, oh, here's his coming out party. He's got a podcast now. So now he's acting out. He's drawing attention to himself. Like, Draymond Green has always been Draymond Green. That's why people love him or hate him. So to say that his podcast is a distraction would probably be, inaccurate. But here's what I will say. I think this is an interesting angle. Is there's a blueprint that I believe that Draymond Green has come up with and that he follows. And one of the things that you have to learn when you do media and when you're a public figure is that you have to be comfortable with people saying the wildest things about you. If you're especially a polarizing figure that is going into media, you got to be okay with people not liking you and still holding true to who you are. Draymond Green is really, to me, doing something that is it's interesting. He's voicing his own opinions on his own show, the safety and the confines of his own show. And the things that he does actions-wise on the court, along with the things that he says on his podcast, has him the most talked about entity outside of the series itself in this series. You would think that the headlines would be dominated by someone else. Maybe it's Tatum. Maybe it's Brown. Maybe it's Curry. It's Draymond Green. We're talking about Draymond Green right now. Draymond is on all of the major television outlets. It's the Draymond effect. Is he a distraction? Draymond came out with the technical. Should it have been 2 technicals? It's like everything a lot of the coverage is surrounding Draymond. I wonder, is it because this isn't the finals that people may have wanted? I mean, is this the best matchup? I don't know. But he is he's the top 2, top 3 point of conversation surrounding this finals.
Is he even a top 5 player in this series? Like, if you're doing a starting 5 in this series between both teams, does he crack the top 5?
He'd be a starting 5. I think he's a starting 5.
Well, I mean, just the 5 best.
He's not a top player.
Jason Tatum, Steph Curry. Clay hasn't played that well. You might say Jordan Poole.
Marcus Smart.
Wiggins. Marcus Smart. I mean, defensively, yeah. I mean, I guess if you're looking at that perspective.
It's just like
he's up in the conversation for it.
But to LaVar's point, like, he's the discussion. Like, we're not hearing anything about really Clay's struggles. I mean, we've talked about it a little bit, but there's not more of a focus on that.
He played better last game.
Yeah, and he shot much better last game, but he has struggled and been off and on throughout the postseason. Steph Curry's, dealing with whatever injury he's dealing with, and all people are talking about is his podcast. Like, Draymond Green's podcast. Dude, who cares? Like, he's got plenty of time to work it in. I don't understand. I almost as if people in the media feel threatened by the presence of athletes in the space that we are used to having. And they look at it as like, oh, well, they can't. No, man, like, there's enough room for everybody, A. And B, it's okay to acknowledge if somebody has a new angle or a new spin on it. Why is the NBA on TNT show as successful as it is? Because those guys played. Because they played, and they can talk about it from a place that nobody else can. And Ernie Johnson knows when to lay back and just let those guys go. And there's nothing wrong with that in this space.
I think the one thing, if you want to really talk about the success of that show and what maybe even Draymond taps into as well, is it's not so much that they just played. There's a lot of people who played, but not a lot of athletes or former athletes are willing to say the things those guys are willing to say, and that leads you to think, like, it's a little closer to the locker room. Like, everyone wants a peek into what the locker room is. Like, I joke with this about media members all the time because they're like, oh, I've been in a locker room. It's like, well, no, you haven't. Like, the locker room starts when you get kicked out. I mean, that's how it was in the NFL. Like I tell media members all the time, you think just because you walk in the locker room and you talk to players at their lockers, that's the locker room that we're referring to. It's not. It's all the stuff that happens when you're not there. Trust me, like people – we used to go 5-0, 5-0. Like people would make sure we let everyone know when the media was coming in, because everyone would get tight-lipped and get quiet, and people wouldn't be acting out the same. Like, and that's how we used to handle it. But the truth is, like, it's that's what they've tapped into, is when you have Chuck and Kenny and Shaq and those guys, and even Draymond when he's on, they're having real conversations, almost like you were sitting in your lockers kind of just chopping something up. And that's something that's unique.
Let's do an exercise here. If you're a sports fan, that's generally the only reason why you're paying attention to the detail of Draymond Green and if he's a distraction, if his podcast is a distraction, right?
Right.
Let's start there. Okay. If you are one of those people, how many minutes in a day, with everything that you have to do, your job, whatever it is you have to do, that is your prime responsibility during the course of that day. Outside of that, what give a time frame on how much you may talk sports during the course of a day? Do you think it's seconds? Do you think it's minutes? Do you think it's hours? What do you think? What would you guys think?
That they talk sports, just the average person listening to this show, and I would say probably
the average person that knows and is paying attention to or having the conversations about Draymond being a distraction and the reasons why.
I would say probably an hour and a half, maybe.
What do you think, Brady?
Yeah, maybe that. I mean,
during the course of a day, maybe an hour.
Yeah,
hour and a, maybe two at tops, right? Like on their
maybe
commute,
2 at tops,
commute, something like that.
Okay, Draymond Green is averaging in his last couple podcasts 29 minutes, 25 minutes, 31 minutes, 38 minutes.
I mean, where's the time go in the day?
Think about this. So we're saying a man that's spending 25 minutes talking about his opinion.
Jonas's visit to the stall. I mean, that's come
on.
So. What?
I mean,
fair point.
Oh, there is an intensity of what this man has to say.
You all right?
Man down. Yeah.
What happened?
Oh, yeah. I was adjusting myself.
Okay.
Well, hold on.
Hold on now.
Way, but yeah, I was just, my back was getting a little sore, my posture. So
I was going to say, is that a new watch?
I have a bad back. Yeah. Anyway,
join the club.
Sorry. And anyway, the point I'm making is, you're talking about 25 minutes. This man goes on the microphone. He's clearly in his hotel room or wherever he's at when he does it, and he's taking 20 to 25 to 30 minutes at tops to discuss the game, to discuss his opinions. And people are out. Like, you got to put it in the proper perspective. How can he be a distraction when he's not even – it's not even that much time? It's not even that much time.
You can't get people to put in 20 minutes of exercise a day. This guy's doing a podcast in a hotel room, not bothering anybody, and all of a sudden that's going to be the reason they lose.
He's
the NBA finals.
He's the downfall of the Golden State dynasty.
It's insane.
For 25 minutes of conversation. I mean, I could see if he got. Now I will say this. I could see if the content and the context of the things that he was discussing, like when they were trying to say, was he giving away game plan? And he very clearly stated, like, talking about how you defend somebody, like if you're putting your hand in their face or something to that effect. Yeah, I mean, if you're talking about generalities, that's what anybody would want an athlete to do in their interview. So if whether it's a reporter that's asking him these questions in that locker room setting, or he's doing his own interview, is basically what a podcast is for Draymond right now. He's doing his own interview. He's doing his own post game interviews. So if he said that in a post game interview, this is so that to me. That's the thing that probably is bothering people, and it shouldn't bother them. But the bottom line is that the context of and the content that he's putting out there, he's not saying anything derogatory. He's not giving out X's and O's. It's not like he's drawing up plays on a board and saying, here's what we're going to do next game, da-da-da, this and that. We're going to do this. We're going to rotate over here. We're going to drop down there. Like, we're going to run a half-court set. Like, he's not doing any of those things. So the things that he's doing is just giving opinion-based deals for 20 minutes. People need to take their panties out of a bunch, man.
Oh, jeez. I mean, listen, I just think that more people need to take the approach that I take, right, Brady? I'm terrible at interviews, all right? Terrible. One of the worst all time. If people would just acknowledge how bad they are at interviews and asking questions, they could just live happily ever after. I mean, I think that's the approach everybody should take.
Those are not my words. Those are yours.
They are 100% fact, though.